Let us take a look at our next rabbi. His name is Rabbi Shammai. Again, we're going to set everything against the temple events. And for a reminder, here's our timeline with those events for the temple. Now that we have seen the temple events, let's put Rabbi Shammai on that timeline and let's see where his time takes place. Take a look at this slide for Rabbi Shammai. As you can see, he is born in 50 BCE and dies in Common Era 30. He again is one of the two major sages, the first sage being Rabbi Hillel, the second being Rabbi Shammai. These are the two leading teachers of Israel at the time, preceding or just leading up to Jesus. So these are two major houses and schools of thought. This is going to be very, very important. Now, it is important that we recognize that Rabbi Shammai becomes a recognized opponent of Rabbi Hillel because these schools of thoughts are a little bit in opposition to each other. It is said that Rabbi Shammai passed some ordinances that strengthened the differentiation between Jew and Gentile. Now, I mention that because it's very important that we see that the Apostle Paul says that the difference between Jew and Gentile is torn down in Messiah. But Rabbi Shammai is teaching that there is definitely a distinction. So that's a very important contrast in information that we want to bring about Rabbi Shammai. Now, what's also interesting is Rabbi Shammai is the grandfather of Rabbi Gamaliel. And that name may sound familiar because Gamaliel is mentioned in Acts chapter 5, and he gives his advice there. But it's also important that we find out that the Apostle Paul, who is considered by some to also be a rabbi, was taught at the feet of Gamaliel. And Paul tells us about that in Acts chapter 22, verse 3, if I have my verse right. So Paul mentions that he was trained by Gamaliel, who is the grandson of Shammai. So we can see how these lines of thoughts come together. And Gamaliel is strict, and Paul admits that he is also part of a strict sect called the Pharisees. So this is very important when we see how all these pieces begin to fit together. Now, Rabbi Shammai went on to teach that one of the core things that one should do with their life is study Torah, which becomes very important. And he taught regarding divorce that there was a stringency about divorce, so that there should be very limited circumstances under which one should be divorced. He is also one who influences the development of the oral law. As I mentioned in the previous segment, that is what will become the Mishnah, which will be written down long after Rabbi Shammai's death. We also know that Rabbi Shammai also found a school of thought called the House of Shammai. And what he has in there is disciples. Those Shammai would teach those men, and those men follow the teachings of Shammai. So this is a house, a school of thought. So he is generally opposed to the teachings of Rabbi Hillel, but both of these men, whether Rabbi Hillel or Rabbi Shammai, are working from what we will come to call the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew canon, which is arranged Genesis to Chronicles. And this is actually very important because it's going to have its influence on what will happen with Rabbi Yeshua, and we will talk about him in our next segment.